Watch us live now at rte.ie/today SOR.
In the 2011 census, 1.8 million people in Ireland claimed that they could speak Irish. But my next guest suspected many of them were like him. They had the cúpla focal from school, but wouldn't be able to hold any kind of conversation. In 2015, he decided to take the plunge and begin relearning the language with the goal of becoming fluent. He has now written a new book about that experience called Coming Home, One Man's Return to the Irish Language. Michael McCaughan, good morning to you. Agus fáilte ród. Now, you began relearning the language by listening, of all things, to the death notices on Raidió Gaeltachta while you were living in South America.
This is it, Seán. You kind of have to start.
What a peculiar start.
You really have to go somewhere else to. It's ironic, after so many years sitting in a classroom in Bunskull and Manskull and everything else and trying to pick up this language, which was compulsory, I suddenly found myself so far away and absolutely no obligation whatsoever on me. And it was like a fever that came over me. And I happened to be in Colombia, and with the benefit of the internet, I could tune in to the programmes on Raidió Gaeltachta, Chulala, and I couldn't understand anything. It was really difficult and intense, and I gave up and I gave up and I gave up. And then I came back and suddenly sounds became unglued for me.
Now, what drove you to want to relearn Irish?
Well, as the book sort of says, it was always on the periphery, in that I was always around Irish speakers. I happened to be, I met someone when I was very young as a teenager whose family all spoke Irish all the time. And as soon as I came in the room, the language switched to English. I sort of felt like I was interrupting the very essence of their daily life.
This wasn't a Gaeltacht teenage romance or anything?
Not a bit of it. This is good old Carrick Dove. This is black rock. Finest, you know. As I was out there in my punk rock gear and my Mohican, this is very much an urban scenario in which Irish, you know, is I just never heard Irish growing up.
Yeah, but really like most of us, you probably had 12 or more years being taught it on a daily basis for at least 3/4 of an hour or thereabouts. But you moved to South America after school. You became fluent in Spanish within a few years. Was there a difference between the way you were taught Spanish or learned Spanish and the way you had tried to learn Irish as a school student?
Well, I went back to my first Irish teacher, Seán, while I was writing this book, Bernie Cosgrove, bless her, who gave us the first cúpla focal Spáinische. And I sort of had it in my head that Spanish is easier, but I'm pretty sure that's simply because now that I speak it, I've forgotten the years of torment that went into learning it. And I remember going back to my family house after my father died some years ago, and I found this old foolscap book in which I'd written down all the vocab for Spanish. And it's very clear that from a very young age, at the age of 12 or 13, I had decided Spanish was critical for my life, for my future. And I was doing what no one else in the class was doing. So I just think the same work went into it as would go into speaking Irish, but that I found myself immersed in a way that never happened with Irish. And therefore Spanish, I think, appears easier, but the same amount of work went into it or more.
The debate about Irish being a compulsory school subject endures. In fact, you refer in the book to a debate we had in this programme between Rosita Boland and Bláthnaid Ní Chofaigh. Where do you stand on compulsory Irish?
You know, I will get off the fence, Seán, I promise. I suppose I'd be prepared to see the end of compulsory Irish if, and this is a condition, I think, of it, there was much more flexibility on how Irish is approached in primary school and secondary school, and that not only is the language taught as a conversation piece, but that there's a higher degree of literature for people who are in Gaeltacht schools and Gaelscoileanna, and that there is an Irish studies element to either Irish or history in which people understand the background to the disappearance of the language shift, and come to it in a different way.
And as well as describing your own relearning experience, you talk about the historic or the revival of the Irish language, quoting Owen McNeill, one-time Minister for Education in the early years of the state, co-founder, of course, of the Gaelic League, in saying that you might as well be putting wooden legs on hens as trying to restore the Irish language through the school system. And yet, that's what they set out to do.
It was, and I think this was a fundamental misreading of the disappearance of Irish. It was felt that because the bata score, the tally stick, Irish was beaten out of kids due to circumstances in the 19th century, that it could almost be beaten back into kids if the same methods of coercion were used. And that failed miserably, not because there wasn't Irish good Irish happening in the classroom, but I think because there was no example from higher up, the politicians did nothing. It was offloaded, the entire job was offloaded onto an education system which is obviously burdened with all the other subjects and all the other pressures, and with no social life outside whatsoever. And that situation pertains today, unless you go up to the north of Ireland, where I would recommend anyone wanting to learn Irish in a hurry and who doesn't want to spend a fortune.
Well, now, the north of Ireland, is that sort of Cuaig Ulla, embracing all 9 counties from Donegal in the west right across to West Belfast?
Definitely, because the Donegal Gaeltachta clearly nourishes the efforts of an urban, of kind of a limited scenario in Belfast where you can do lots of classes and you can meet certain people and they know each other and they meet and they do Irish, and there's the Common Clunorge and there's the Culturlan and there's East Belfast and so on. But it's critical, the journeys to Donegal, and that's probably why the Leafocht grant, the cutting of that grant, which seems so insignificant, a small amount of money, meant so much to people maybe in the north, because
this is the DUP minister given.
That's right. So that didn't look like much, but it may be something that's considered critical to the language for people.
Yeah. Now, you also spent time in other Gaeltachta in Galway and Kerry during the summer of 2015. How did those experiences in the different Gaeltachta, how did they compare and contrast?
I think at the end of the day, that wasn't a huge shift forward for me, because it's a week in each place in a very sort of controlled environment, in that you're staying, apart from one place, I was staying in independent lodging. So, I mean, they were all amazing places where you are within an Irish-speaking environment. And obviously English has spread in there. There's a lot of tourism. So you go down to the most beautiful parts of Ireland. You go down to Kerry, you go down to Ballyferriter, you go to Raidió, you go to Gael up in Donegal, and you're in this beautiful place where Irish is being spoken inside in a teaching manner. You are again in a classroom. You're with 8, 10, 15 people. It's 1 week. It feels like an awful lot, but at least it feels like only a certain amount is done. But what it does give you, I think, is the confidence to go further. And also, critically, seeing foreigners learning Irish without the baggage that we have and without the constant whining and moaning and why, a chonas, a chono. It's a very healthy environment to go back to Irish.
Now, you mentioned Idris Gael and people like Liam O'Connor and other wonderful people in Donegal. And you say the government has shown little enthusiasm for the language, and you cite the appointment of Joe McHugh as Minister of State for Gaeltacht Affairs when he had little Irish, and he went off and he tried to learn it. He did learn it. But you're critical. You say that the Irish language media gave him a soft ride. Absolutely, because I think there's a critical difference between, say, me, for example. I had probably the same level of Irish when he picked up his job as junior minister. But I'm not looking for a job through the Irish language. I'm going to spend time learning the language before I approach any of my work, say, as a reporter in South America through Irish. But here's someone charged with a very serious responsibility who basically cannot communicate with his constituents at the time of appointment of his job. It would have been wonderful if he'd done the work maybe before taking on the job. But having said that, Cogorge has led... Yeah, but I was just... Sorry, you better continue.
I know what you're going to say.
Something nice. I was about to accuse you of
I know what you're going to say. He's going back, and I followed his career through Idris Gael, and he went to the Ord Wrong, and, I'm cheering there as well. Anyone who comes back to Irish, fair play. And he's now going back as a Moontor, so he's going to be teaching in Idris Gael this year. So there's a clear trajectory of interest there that goes beyond the job, because he's now doing something else. But I think you have to be, the situation in the Gaeltacht is so serious nowadays that it needs people who the language shouldn't be their main task when they're appointed to the job. Going back to Northern Ireland, Michael, do you think that the language has become politicised there in a way that's been, you could say, quite helpful where nationalists are concerned, because there is the demand for learning the language as an expression of Irish identity, and also there's a demand there for all Irish schools? I think what happened in the north of Ireland is that it became politicised to the degree in which the 6 counties was living out a very dysfunctional period in history. And it is now becoming somewhat depoliticised as the North assumes a measure of stability in after the peace process. And that is why you see more people learning Irish in East Belfast in Linda Irvine's organisation, which was a complete shock to me, than you have signed up for the classes in West Belfast. So something has happened around the peace accord which has maybe given permission, and that's why I think this phrase on Will Cead Gum keeps coming up again and again around people, the cead, the idea of permission. Well, Cead Gum Dulles Jock, maybe. In terms of using the language. Now, in fact, your own efforts
They led to an hour-long interview on Raidió na Gaeltachta, and you found out right before you were about to go on air that you were in over your head. Tell us what happened.
Absolutely. It's one thing. I meet this so often with people who say, look, I've learned some Irish. I understand a lot of Irish, but I just can't get the words out. They won't come out of my mouth in any coherent form. So it's hard enough if you go to a circle co-raw, which is just a casual conversation circle. But you're sitting in front of a mic as I am now. And if I had to speak a language in which I am at best hesitant and way ahead of my plans, like it's nice to be in control of language and decide when you're ready to speak on air about something. And particularly something that means as much to me as Colombia, South America, and my work there. I was really anxious. And I was sweating. I was in a state by the end of it, but I got through it. And each time you do it, it's a challenge and you do something else. It's like a marathon, as Dermot Johnson says in the book. You take a few steps, you jog a bit further, you take something else on. But the main thing is you stick with it day by day.
Now we're coming to the end of Seachtain na Gaeilge, which might have inspired a few people to pick up the language. What should people do if they want, in your view, if they want to start relearning?
I think the first thing is to have absorbed the sounds of Irish, even if you've none. Simply turn on Raidió na Gaeltachta or turn on the other stations that are out there, or the websites that have some Irish. You don't have to listen to an Irish language radio station. There's lots of other tools. Absorb it. Also, there are wonderful CDs. Googly Gug, for example, from a small publisher, Foot the Fat in Spiddle, is like a phonetic. It's kids and adults with rhymes and singing. And that's just an easy way that you can put it on. And it's very high quality music and Irish. And you just get used to it. So work at your own pace. Don't put pressure on yourself. Make appropriate goals. The question I always get asked from people is, are you fluent? They don't say, how's your Irish coming along? It's like, are you fluent yet? As if to say there are only two things with Irish. I have no Irish or I'm fluent. There are lots of steps along the way to be enjoyed as they come along. And in a sense, I suppose I've tried to follow the stepping stones towards something.
There's a chapter called Essentials for the Learning Cupboard.
That's right.
What are they apart from the learning aid that you mentioned?
Well, a dictionary, a folklore, as they say in Irish, is really essential. People sort of almost look down on dictionaries because it's regarded as slow and unwieldy to hold a large book in your hand. There's nothing like casually picking up a word, or you're looking for one word and you find another, and literally one word leads to another. You get going.
Mentioned one in particular, a dictionary by a man called Patrick Dineen.
That's right.
Now, he's dead nearly. He died in 1934. I mean, what's so special about his dictionary?
The special about his dictionary is that he was a very eccentric character who made a huge effort to find the spoken Irish of the people and collect the words and bring them together with all their intricate layers of meaning. Because when you look at and I think this is when people say, what's so important about Irish? The fact of the matter is that the ground upon which we walk is laden with Irish. It's thin shanachas, as the word says. It's place lore. It's got all the stories and the trace of whatever was happening back in the years before. And O'Donnell somehow managed to bring that together. And now reading it, I'm sure it was all very serious to him. It's quite funny in the context of where we are in 2017 to be reading these extensive definitions of sheep and goats and whatever you have.
He didn't have to put Gaeilge on post-it notes, but you think they're quite important for learning Irish?
Yeah, there's something. One of the things about Irish is that it simply is invisible. So there's this kind of chain of invisibility that the less you see it, the less you think there is any Irish. And you almost assume nobody has any Irish. But because I gave myself permission again to speak to anyone I felt like in the street about Irish, I suddenly found out that I was surrounded by Irish. Not by fluent Irish, not by native speakers, not by people with brilliant grammar, but people who had a lot more Irish than I thought and were willing to give it a go if they were approached in a friendly manner. I emphasise friendly.
That you have a great graw for Raidió na Gaeltachta. What about T.G. Carr?
I don't have a television, Sean. I think the more television you watch, the less intelligent you are.
Well, there's no supplementary question to that. The book is called Coming Home, One Man's Return to the Irish Language by Michael McCaughan. It's published by Gill and it sells for €16.99, or if you're buying it in Bell Firishta, $14.99 sterling. Michael, Gurmil Mogat.
Gurmagat, hey.
Today with Seán O'Rourke on RTE Radio 1.